Welcome to Technopolitics. I'm Jim Glassman. Intel Corporation manufactures the key components of 85% of the world's personal computers. With prices steadily dropping and their products improving, Intel says it is serving its customers well. But the Federal Trade Commission thinks Intel may have become too powerful. Recently, they launched an investigation to answer this question: has Intel become a threat to competition?
The personal computer is almost everywhere these days, and inside almost every PC there's an Intel chip. The big West Coast company now supplies the brains for 85% of all the world's PCs. That's a big market share, so big in fact that the Federal Trade Commission has begun to study it closely. Intel's microprocessors, like the Pentium and Pentium 2, are the critical parts of your PC. The chips follow your instructions, execute the programs you want to run, and they do it with incredible speed. So the big computer manufacturers like Dell and Compaq and Packard Bell buy Intel chips by the millions. The manufacturers probably couldn't stay in business without Intel, which causes federal regulators to worry. Does Intel pressure the computer makers? Does it force the manufacturers to put Intel chips inside their machines? Worse still, does Intel use its market power to force the computer makers to buy new Intel products, like special chips to improve graphics, or circuit boards that link all the components? This past September, the FTC launched its second investigation of Intel in 6 years. They're now gathering information from all concerned: the chip giant, its competitors, and their customers. Intel intends to mount a strong defense. The company says it doesn't need to use unfair tactics. It succeeds because it treats customers right. Intel invented the microprocessor in 1971 and has been doubling its speed every 18 months since, all the while cutting costs to the consumer. In fact, no company is more responsible for the breathtaking speed of the global revolution in computing power, which means the government may have a hard time finding a victim among Intel's legions of satisfied customers. And as for those new markets Intel's been exploring, the company's engineers say they can make better products by integrating multiple technologies. Why, they wonder, would the government oppose that?
Is Intel a monopoly that's closed out the competition, or a company that's played by the rules and won in the marketplace? Here to answer that question are Christine Varney, a former commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission, and Peter Huber, engineer, attorney, and columnist for Forbes magazine. Christine, why is the FTC investigating Intel?
Well, Intel has an 85% market share in microprocessors, and anytime you have a monopolist of that size, you need to take a careful look at some of the practices that they may be engaging in that foreclose competition in the field, and that's what they're taking a
What are
good,
some of those
careful
practices?
look. Well, there's been allegations that Intel has used its market share to coerce OEMs to
OEMs, computer makers.
I'm sorry, the original equipment manufacturers
Just
of computers.
people that make computers.
Right. People make computers to upgrade to a Pentium 2 chip sooner than they otherwise would to try and foreclose competition from the Intel clones. So that's one of the allegations.
Okay, well, just stop there. So Intel is alleged to have gone to computer makers and say, you got to buy our Pentium 2 chip.
Right. And you got to buy it now.
And you got to buy it now, and we don't want you buying anything from these other people.
We don't want you buying anything from these other people, and if you start buying from these other people, we're not going to put you inside the Intel Inside program. We're not going to give you the back-end support. A number of practices.
What's wrong with that?
Well, there's
pressure. Isn't selling pressure sort of part of the game?
Incentive is good. Coercion is bad.
Does that make sense to you?
It really doesn't. I mean, Washington is full of lawyers who think they know how a company like Intel should market its products. The fact is, Intel has to have distributors. It needs Compaq, it needs a vibrant Dell, and it needs ultimately people who buy these machines. And the notion that you're somehow going to, kill Dell, if just for the fun of it or so on, it seems to me absurd. In these vertical relationships, there's a complete commonality of interest between Intel and the downstream people. I mean, they're not in opposed positions. Of course, they argue and debate and work out how best to distribute the product. But the notion that we need a layer of Washington lawyers to tell Intel how to deal with its customers seems to me ridiculous.
So, is it conceivable to you that a company could ever be coercive?
In these purely vertical relationships, I'm perfectly willing to believe companies do foolish things. But why they would cut off their own best customers, for arbitrary or irrational reasons, if they do that, I'm quite confident that Washington lawyers don't know when that happens. Those are business calls.
What about that?
Well, I don't think Washington lawyers have any interest in destroying the marketplace or telling Intel how to do business. I think that the government officials who enforce the antitrust laws have a big interest in making sure that companies are not illegally using their monopolies to foreclose.
Really, what would the FTC, you say they don't have an interest, what would the FTC do
Yeah.
if it couldn't enforce antitrust laws?
They have a monopoly.
Oh, no, I think that the FTC has an interest in enforcing antitrust laws. That's not the same as destroying businesses or telling businesses how they ought to make decisions or practices. That's called enforcing the law.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's just fine rhetoric, but the question is, is there a rational body of law here, and is there a coherent antitrust and economic theory?
Okay, are there any other problems that you think Intel, any other activities that Intel is engaging in that have come to the attention of the FTC?
I believe, and I don't know this other than through reading the press as everyone else, that the government is taking a very broad look at Intel's marketing practices generally when it comes to computer manufacturers for its microprocessor and related products. I think it's a broad inquiry.
Are you talking about like tying as they call it, where you take a microprocessor and you put lots of other chips on it, and essentially you've got one big microprocessor, other functions?
I think there could be a couple of elements to the investigation that they're looking at. There may be a tying element, there may be a monopoly leveraging element, there may be a Section 2 maintenance of monopoly claim.
What's that mean?
Section 2 of the Sherman Act says that monopolies do exist, they may be legal, however, they may not illegally use their market power to foreclose competition. So it's basically saying you've got 85% of the market, you ought to be maintaining 85% of the market because you're the best product on the market, not because you're coercing manufacturers.
So do you think that they've got 85% because they're coercing people?
No, I think they've got 85% because they're a great company with a great product. I think that they may be engaged
So
in
maybe soon they won't be a great company if the government gives them a hard enough time.
Well, I don't think that anybody would agree that the government's got the ability to take a great company and make it anything less than great. Hopefully what the government's got the ability to do is work with the company and point out where they may be crossing the line legally. If the company doesn't agree, that's what courts are for.
Look, the government has plenty of power to bottle up people to the point where they're crippled and just essentially driven out of business. The astonishing thing is, if you had looked 10 years ago, Intel was on the verge of complete failure because they had invested very heavily in the memory chip market. And at that time, a pack of Washington lawyers would have said, you guys are dominating this market. We've got to put the screws on you right here and now. They exited from that by the skin of their teeth. They invested heavily in microprocessors. They created that industry. I mean, they created from scratch. They created America's leading position as an exporter in this market. And Washington just loves success. I mean, it loves it because it employs a lot of lawyers here, a lot of people who really don't have any products to build but like to investigate people. And that's
Peter,
what's
what about this claim about tying, where you've got the one big microprocessor and Intel puts lots of functions on it so that their competition, which is selling these other little chips that have specific functions, really can't get a foothold?
Yeah,
is that a problem?
In 15 years, the little microprocessor has gone from a few hundred transistors to a couple of million gates, all right? It's grown fantastically. It's the biggest technological revolution in our time. It's produced fantastic efficiencies, unimaginable, and they've all come from packing more and more into a tighter and tighter space, and this drives antitrust lawyers nuts because it looks like the quintessential tie. You keep taking functionality from everywhere else, you pack it tighter, you make it work better. For everybody else, that's progress. For an antitrust lawyer, that's a conspiracy against the public.
Well, I think that's a lot of really attractive rhetoric. When you get down to the reality, when is functionality impeded by an integration that is solely to gain market share in other markets? And that's what we're looking at.
The lawyers know that, the engineers don't, right?
But what's wrong with
the engineers do, and I think you'll see the FTC with a lot of engineering evidence on what's going on.
The FTC is our expert on building chips.
No, actually, Peter, they hire people like you to provide them the expertise on
They wouldn't
engineering.
hire people like me because I wouldn't dream of working on anything so silly.
Look, I was a Federal Trade Commissioner for 3 years. I can tell you that the Federal Trade Commission does not open an investigation like this without substantial evidence to warrant the investigation, to go look and see if the information that we're getting carries through.
But this has been going on since, what, 1991?
No, there was an Intel investigation before I got to the Federal Trade Commission, which was focused on a very narrow, very specific tying claim, which my understanding is they found was not true. And they shut it down and they moved on. This investigation, my guess is premised on a number of computer manufacturers coming forward to the FTC.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, Peter.